The following is a production of UNO Television for KYNE TV. Consider This with Carol Schrader, a news and information program recorded on the campus of the University of Nebraska at Omaha. From the Fireside Lounge in the Milo Bale Student Center, here is your host, Carol Schrader.
Hello and welcome to the Milo Bale Student Center. This is getting near the end of the school year and near the end of the run of Consider This for the school term. But I would ask you to consider this. We have a lame duck governor. It's no, reflection upon you, but Governor Ben Nelson is with us today. We are honored. But that's a terrible term.
Well, I think most people do understand what it means. But when you work with the legislature, they don't want you to just be a lame duck. They want you to be a dead duck, a wounded duck, sitting duck.
They probably thought about that when you vetoed the education bill.
Well, I wasn't much of a duck during that process, but I think what it means is typically that you usually don't get a lot done in your last year because people are thinking about your successor or they think you're thinking about other things. And I'm trying to disprove that this year because we're going to play until the final buzzer. That's what I was elected to do, and that's what we're going to do.
Well, we had a special session. You've now signed the second take on the education bill, and so that's sort of a done deal. You did really try to put the hammer on them this year to do something about the tax situation.
Well, what I think they were able to do is become somewhat schizophrenic. And I mean that as positively as I can. First of all, it was a very successful session in terms of tax cutting. Permanent income tax cut of 5%, 1 year half-cent sales tax cut, a business tax cut for unemployment costs of 50%, and then of course by putting a lid on spending together with the levy limit that was put on property taxes of a year ago, now there's a statewide average of a property tax cut of between 10 and 15%. So they had a great year when it came to cutting taxes, and particularly when you combine that with motor vehicle tax cuts a year ago, that was really good. That's the good news. The bad news is, and where the schizophrenia comes in, is suddenly they went on a spending spree. And I had to veto, and they overrode some of my vetoes even more so this year than last year. And I happened to catch a bill, 1175, that was being advocated as a cleanup bill. And largely it was, except for one amendment that was going to make it a blank check for at least $70 million, and who knows, some people estimated maybe as much as $84 million in the year 2001. And that's when I did my timeout, vetoed it, and then we worked out the details this early spring and late spring and early summer now, if you will, to bring them back and pass it the way it should have been passed in the first place.
Now I know that one of the, I hate to use the word legacies like you're going to die, come the inauguration of the next governor. But one of the legacies you wanted to leave was in the area of tax cutting.
That's right.
And you seem pretty happy that was done, but now we're going to have to see what happens with all these local government tax lids and the overrides. And how do you feel when you see some of the school districts voting to override?
Well, let me put it this way. The fact that they have the opportunity to do that is outstanding, because that's local control. What I have never wanted to do from the state's vantage point was to put local governments in a position where they couldn't make decisions. That's why local control is so important. And when you have citizens in a taxing district, a school district, whether it's 66 or Ralston, decide differently on what they want their tax situation to be, that's local control at its best. That's democracy. That's what it's all about. That's different than the state forcing things onto local groups. What we've created is a, if you will, an umbrella approach. It's a structure. We've said here, if you can decide if you want lower taxes or more services, and you'll have to vote to do that, but it'll be a consensus building effort. Not everybody will agree with it, because there'll be some on the other side, but they can't disagree with the fact that it's democracy in action.
Now, how is the having to sort of equalize and give aid to school districts that that need the money because of the way the other changes and because they're smaller school districts or whatever the problems are. How is that working out? Because that still means that we have to take state money and put it back in and sort of substitute dollars for dollars.
Well, one of the things that is a benefit in the bill that I signed today, LB 1, that was in LB 1175, but that is if you will, it straightens out some of the unusual things that have happened in the effort to smooth out the funding over the state. There was a lop-off provision that was adverse to Omaha, Grand Island, and many other larger school districts. They said you got too much and they cut off the amount, and just, I wouldn't say arbitrarily, but it seemed arbitrary that they cut it off at this point. And so that was fixed so that Omaha ends up getting more than it would have otherwise gotten. But we've also worked out an arrangement as part of that to create differences in funding for schools that are very sparsely populated, remotely located, so that they can't develop efficiencies. They're an island, if you will, in a sea of no population.
Right. There's no one. They had a lot of. You have Murray-Conestoga and all this, the consolidations. There are some places in Nebraska where there is no one to
There's no way that it can happen. And you say, well, why don't you join forces with your neighbor in the next county? And kids would be bused or would have to bust an hour and a half each way, or
almost need a dormitory.
Or have a dormitory and then have your kids leave the families at a time when we're pushing family values and valuing families more. So that has to be recognized. Either that or we say, and believe me, I'm the last person to advocate this, and I'll fight it to the death if anybody does, and that is, well, we're going to close down the sandhills and close down our cattle operations because we can't provide public school services out there, or we won't pay for them out there. That's inappropriate, and we're not going to do that. So you have to recognize that those schools have a built-in economic inefficiency that they can't overcome directly. Now, distance education helps them, and they're looking for sharing services in other ways, maybe with sharing libraries with communities in the area as opposed to each having a separate library. There's still things they can do, but some things they just can't do. You need to recognize that to be fair.
What have been your other, as you get to the end of 8 years, do you see anything other than I'm sure you wanted to cut taxes all along, but do you see anything else that you maybe started to view a little differently? Maybe not in terms of what you wanted to do as an end result, but maybe how one goes about it?
Well, I guess I'd say, as I look back, I see what we've done, and it causes me to think forward. Cutting taxes, to me, really the purpose of cutting taxes is not because it's just good politics, it's good government. To make sure that you're taxing people fairly and you're spending wisely. I said that when I was running in 1989 and 1990, and we've tried to adhere to that. To take only the amount of money you need to do what is required for good quality education, good quality services to protect the environment, economic development, put some away for a rainy day because they do come, and then finally give the rest back to taxpayers. That, as fiscal stewardship, I think is what we've established, and I would not say that it's on autopilot, but I think we've set the stage, I think we've charted the course, I think it can be stayed in the future. But I want to emphasize that there's within that structure, there's also the need to provide quality education for our young people at every age, higher education as well as K through 12 education, and also we're looking at job training and all kinds of skill level training to help people continue in lifelong learning programs, and a good combination at the higher education level of our community colleges, our state colleges, and our university system, private and public institutions, and make sure they're all working to benefit. When you do that within the structure of stewardship, then I think you can look back and you can say, I think we've done the right thing, and you can look forward and see that your structure is in place for the future.
I look across the river to Iowa, and I paid cursory attention to what Governor Branstad was going through with teacher pay, educational reform. Are there any parallels with what's happening, or are they going through what we went before, or are we going to catch up with them? I mean, obviously this is a process of trying to do more with less.
Well, that's what it's all about. Earlier today, I had a 30-minute address to a government restructuring group in Lincoln of people from all over the state, from all walks
You sort
of
of
life and
convened
history.
some of these.
Yeah,
people.
that was convened at my request, and there's no doubt that we're all expected, and I told them to think about this. We're all being asked to do more with less, and you can, but you've got to be more efficient. You've got to be creative, and you've got to assume there's no dumb idea except the one you're afraid to put out on the table. Take the risk, leave the comfort zone of always doing what you've always done, because you'll always get what you've always got. If you want to change that, then you have to change the whole process, or change something about the process to make it different, to get a different result. We're faced with that. I think it's good. I think we will be better when we work our way through it. Otherwise, if you don't get change, you've got to assume that what you're doing is perfect, and nobody would assume that. So perfection and our desire for protection requires change and improvement.
And they're going through this across the river,
All
too?
across the river, and I've talked to Governor Branstad, who's a very, very good friend of mine, and I teased him. I said, you seem to be having more trouble with your Republicans being partisan against you, and he was laughing. And then I saw a headline in the Omaha paper in which he complained that they were being too partisan. And so, you experience different problems different ways, but they're always about the same things: funding, who gets it, and how much, and what's fair. And so if one thing pops up over here, you know it's going to pop up over there, and vice versa. So that's why governors like to get together, because we share our mutual problems, and we also share some of our solutions. And he arms me with a few ideas, and every now and then I can arm him with an idea.
Let me ask that. Speaking of Governor Branstad, you say you're good friends. You don't seem to be that far apart politically, even though you're a Democrat and he's a Republican. So cut from the same kind of Midwestern cloth, fiscally conservative, socially, let's just say, with a conscience. Do you feel a little bit of a kinship?
Sure. Yeah, I think governors tend to be closer, even quite apart from maybe national political parties, because governors come together and end up fighting both the majority and the minority parties in Washington, within the Senate and the House, on certain issues. We come together and we don't agree with either political party on some of those issues, so you get more coalitions among governors because the problems are not partisan, and what happens is political parties tend to come up with partisan approaches that just won't work, or beg the question in many instances.
One of the things that has been said about you, particularly when you ran for Senate, and was that Ben Nelson is a Republican's Democrat. That you're moderate. You probably could be aligned with either party on certain issues. You happen to be a Democrat, but you ran on a lot of what would have been perceived as you could see them in any Republican platform.
Well, I have never been a particularly partisan person, and I think that helps me in some instances. It may also be the reason that only 30% of the Democratic Party turned out to vote in 1996, so it sure didn't help me. But regardless of how that plays out, I think there are certain things and certain values and principles that you have to adhere to and believe in, and if you're going to be asked or required to go to a litmus test or to a party line to be a member, I'm not much interested in that. And I've never been asked to do that by the Democratic Party, and I suspect that's one of the reasons that I'm comfortable. I don't agree with everybody within the party, and obviously not everybody in the party agrees with me, but we've all been able to work together. Maybe it was Will Rogers who said, I don't belong to an organized political party, I'm a Democrat. Maybe that's why he said
about that.
Yeah.
What about the Senate race, looking back? And we'll get back to the 8 years as governor. You ran ultimately against a Republican who was a young, relatively, in the world of politics, young up-and-comer, and certainly had some federal experience, let's say, just having been in Washington working for Congressman McAllister. Pretty savvy, looked good on camera, had a pretty good bankroll. resonated with the voters on a lot of issues. I mean, you can talk about the campaign and the advertising, but
Now you're explaining to me why I lost.
But you were always pretty good at that too. There was some feeling that maybe you were didn't get the financial support from Democrats that probably they owed you in a sense because you were a good governor and represented the party well in many respects, and B, that any person they put up for that election should get.
Well, I learned something. I learned that you can't listen to a pollster. Because in 1990, my pollster told me I couldn't win. And in 1996, I guess the pollster said I couldn't lose. Wrong both times. I think what really happened there is it was a mistake for me to run, I'll admit it. Because it was midterm, I said I wouldn't. That was a disadvantage that I started with. The second thing is that it raised a question about who was going to replace you. And so your opponents just obviously have two people to shoot at, and two targets are harder to protect.
Yeah, if you don't
than
like this argument, we'll give you another one.
Yeah, and then the other part to that is that I heard it until I was blue in the face, and that is that you've done such a good job as governor. We need to keep you as governor. It doesn't matter nearly as much who's a senator. I heard that until I was blue in the face. Well, if each one of those amounts to 5%. Erosion, and you have a 30% turnout of people from your party, statistically you can't win, and I didn't. You lose. But it was a mistake to do it because I should have kept my focus right on finishing the job. That's where my love was aimed. That's where I've always wanted to be, was governor. Now, the reason I decided to do it is because I found that more problems were being heaped on the states by the federal government than by any other source or any other group. And I wanted to go and establish, and I still want to see established, a new rank of federalism in Washington where the states have a greater piece of the action to decide policy, and that there is a partnership where the states are co-equal partners in this process. Stop unfunded mandates, underfunded mandates, stop top-down governing, the same way I've tried to do it from the standpoint of the state with local governments, the way that communities can now decide if they want higher taxes, property taxes, or fewer services. So in looking back, there's no doubt about it, it was a mistake. Not because I lost, but because I should have kept my focus on being governor rather than trying to make it easier for all governors to be governor.
Well, your friends on Capitol Hill, I think even as we speak today, or at least we're scheduled to discuss the highway bill, which is one of those kinds of examples where
perfect example.
They've it looked like we were going to have to consider or maybe passed lowering the drinking level or the blood alcohol level and a number of...
It's a separate issue. Now, I'm not saying that that's not a good issue to debate, but what's it got to do with the funding for the highway bill? They take our money back there under our federal gas tax, hold it, and then make us come and beg and plead with them to give it back to us. They don't give it all to us because they use some of it for deficit reduction to hide the fact that they don't really balance the budget. If they gave us all the gas tax money that we send to them, then they couldn't balance the budget by using it, and they ought not to collect it in the first place. We ought to have a different system where we collect it and hold it and give a certain amount to them for their federal highways and let us have the rest and to spend how we decide. I mean, that's why, you see I get exercise. That's why I ran in 1996, because I think there's something backward about the system that needs to be readjusted, and somebody needs to go and take that message back there. Typically when people go back there, they get caught up in the club, and they don't want to make the changes. They don't want to face the reality that things should begin and they should end at the state and local level.
The U.S. Senate is one of the most exclusive clubs in the world, and in some respects, or many respects, a very powerful, one of the most powerful clubs of 100 in the world. And you could have been there. You had a good shot at it. Power does tend to corrupt. We all know that, and we've seen that. Is there a difference in being governor because you're closer to the people, as in a mayor closer to the people of the city, in terms of you can't let it go to your head, or
well, yeah,
or did you ever think it might be, or did you ever go home at night and say, I got to get back to these people. These are the, Is
Well,
it easier to get away from it there?
it's hard to evaluate yourself that way. I mean, you have to pay attention more to what people say about you and to you. And I haven't had anybody ever come to me and think that I've changed as governor. I mean, we all change as people as
You're
we go
still
along.
Ben.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's the way I want to be. It's the way I wanted to be, and I didn't want to change, and I don't think I have. I'm perfectly happy to go back and to what I was doing before, or something like that, or even something different, because I'll still be me when it's all said and done. Yes, there is a sense in which being closer to the people can help you with that, and you probably have to work harder at it when you go to Washington. But it depends on whether you live there, represent the people out here, whether you live here and go back there to represent the people. It's where your primary residence is. My primary residence would have been in Nebraska. And the primary office would have been in Nebraska. I would spend time in Washington to represent the people there, people here while I'm there, representing them in that environment. But my clocks in the wall would have had Mountain Time, Central Time, and Eastern Time. And because you have to work harder at it to keep that focus. I guess I would work hard at that, and that was also in my mind of going back there to keep the orientation about what's going on here. What happens to people who go back there is they think that's where it's happening, and it does happen there, but everything that happens back there ought to be about here. That the federal government doesn't exist for any other purpose than as a result of the states. The Constitution, when you think about it, the 10th Amendment makes it clear. They only have the power that have been given to them by the states.
But we keep arguing that in courts, and
Courts are starting to listen now. The courts are coming around to the conclusion that the 10th Amendment means exactly what it says, that it's been misinterpreted or ignored.
in the absence of anything else in any other
Exactly.
place.
Now, I think there's a role for the federal government, but I don't think that role exists apart from the people back here. Government there has begun to exist for its own sake, and that's part of a problem. So that's why I got exercised in 1996, decided to run. I wish I hadn't, because I lost an election. But more than that, it's because my focus was here, should stay here, and if I take a look at that scene back there sometime, that's a separate time frame, and I should have finished my job. I think it's very difficult in the middle of your term or something like that to run. I'm tending to agree more with the people that that's a real challenge, that you maybe you shouldn't do that.
We have 2 U.S. senators, as does every other state. We have a Democrat and Republican. The Republican, you lost to an election. Bob Kerrey precedes you. Let's skip a governor or two before as governor. What do you think? What's your experience in trying to fight for Nebraska's rights and kinds of things, working with that Senate delegation and our congressional delegation as well?
Well, my experience has been relatively good, very good with Bob Kerrey, and excellent with Jim Exon. I think it depends on the issue. I would say that I had good luck only with Senator Kerrey and Congressman Berreiter when it came to the highway bill this year, period. And that you can write it any way you want on the others. Finally, they have come around, but they were off on other issues along the way about deficit reduction. I'm in favor of deficit reduction, but it always gets cast in the either or. Either you're for the highway fund or you're for deficit reduction. You can be for both. What they need to do is cut spending somewhere else if they're going to reduce the deficit, not out of the highway fund. Those are dedicated funds. Senator Kerrey and Congressman Berreiter were the only ones who initially were voting right on that from the standpoint of what was good for the state. And there were 57 senators, I think, who shared that view in Washington on a bipartisan basis. And fortunately, now things have moved along, and so whoever wasn't there at the beginning can come in at the end. I'm happy to have them, but I only ask the question: why weren't they there at the beginning? If others hadn't stayed there along the way, we might not have the end that we have that they can now jump in and vote for. And they can rebut it if they want. These are pretty strong words for me, but it's the truth. And they disagreed with virtually all the other governors. It's not about partisanship. It's not about whining about losing an election. It's about what's best for the state of Nebraska and not characterizing things as either or. Back there, that they tend to do that.
Well, we're running out of time, so I'm trying to squeeze some stuff in. There may be an initiative on the ballot that talks about putting more caps and limiting more spending. Since you do believe that the people should make decisions, how do you feel about that?
Well, the people will if they vote for the constitutional amendment.
Right.
Sure.
I guess the petition and the initiative process, nobody'd want to take it away, but in terms of its impact on everything else, when somewhat you in the legislature come to an understanding and there seems to be progress, at least in your mind.
Well, I think the legislature may leave this as a legacy from this session. Very honestly, as I say, it was schizophrenic. They were good on tax cutting. From my perspective, they were bad on spending. Exactly. And they do it at a time when the people are looking at a forced constitutional lid that they can vote for that would require the legislature not to spend more than a certain amount, and any additional amount that's collected by the legislature would have to come back in the form of tax cuts. There has been, I think, this time a little bit of an erosion of the credibility of the legislature on how they can handle money, and I don't know whether
so every time
it's a right problem. The business community has identified the right problem. It's spending.
But is this the right? Could this be a right solution?
Well, I think things are coming out on it that need to be looked at and addressed, and I'm still studying it because I want to be sure I know what it is that it will do positively and or negatively, intentionally and or unintentionally, before I can jump on it. And so more information is coming out, and I'll take a position on it. But I can tell you right now, regardless of whatever position I take on that solution, they have identified the right problem. It's a spending problem.
We have just about a minute left. I want to ask you about, you put your lieutenant governor, who you seem to work very well with, in charge of worrying about the technology issue in the state, and then there was the issue of state employees, and do we have too many? I mean, is that going to be an ongoing issue? Is that an important issue?
Well, I hope it's an ongoing issue of how we manage technology in the future, and how we coordinate it, and how we share information so we don't duplicate, or we don't overdo, or we don't underdo anywhere in the area of growing technology.
Make sure all our systems maybe even work when we pay for them?
Make sure that they mesh, they work, and that we're working together with private business to know what's going on as well, so that we're not operating in a vacuum. And I would hope that the question would always be out there for my successor, whoever that may be, to continue to ask the question, can we do more with less? More with less money and more with less employees.
We have 10 seconds. You don't have any idea what you're going to do when you get out of the mansion?
I know it might be hard to believe, but it's true. I don't know yet.
I want to thank you for joining us. We could
pleasure.
talk on and on. Governor Ben Nelson on Consider This. Have a great week.